The feelings I had after my first viewing of Ari Aster's Hereditary were intense and complicated. Not since my first viewing of William Friedkin's The Exorcist when I was 8 had a film shook me to my core and left me with such a profound feeling of dread. This dread is exacerbated further by the immense feeling of isolation the film makes the viewer feel in conjunction with the audience. With the exception of a handful of scenes, the characters in this movie are almost always relegated to lonely, haunting, and imposing, yet beautiful environments. The Grahams, the unfortunate family upon which the cult of Paimon has set their sights, live in a gorgeous wooden house in the Utah mountains, but there are no neighbors nearby, no one to interact with on a regular basis, no one to check in on them if they haven't been seen, no one to call for help if they need it, and no one to hear their anguished screams of fear, pain, sorrow, and grief that can only come from a mother who has not only lost her child, but lost her in such a gruesome and terrible way. Even the later scenes with Peter at school only serve to show just how distant he's become from his friends and classmates. I think the reason why Hereditary has stuck with me for so long is because it's a story about a family broken by forces beyond their control and desperately trying to hold itself together, but was tragically doomed before we even knew them. It's something that's hammered into us from the moment the film starts, illustrated with the miniature Annie finds herself locked into working on. Family is a common thread that writer and director Ari Aster follows in all of his works to date, although the script is being written before the release of Eddington in July of 2025, so this may change to an extent. And I think that this is a really interesting piece of information to examine. To be clear, this video isn't an attempt to psychoanalyze Ari Aster, nor is it an attempt to criticize him for using family as a method of creating emotional depth in his films. I'm barely qualified to write the video we're already making here, and I'm substantially less qualified for something like that. I find it incredibly interesting how in each of Aster's films to date, our main characters have people in their families who ignite the inciting incident to whatever horrors await them further along in the story. And today I'd like to examine each of his films, how this comes about, and most importantly, what it might represent. However, before I do that, I'd like to give a quick content warning. Some of the subjects Ari Aster covers in his films, which will also be covered in this video, include sexual violence involving adults and children. They also include child abuse and trauma, the death of children, cults, human sacrifice, and giant penis monsters. If discussions of any of these things is troublesome to you, I suggest selecting another one of my videos to watch. With that being said, let's begin with The Strange Thing About the Johnsons. The Strange Thing About the Johnsons was Ari Aster's 2011 thesis film while studying at the American Film Institute. The 29-minute short film premiered at the Slamdance Film Festival in Utah in November of 2011, and it's actually available to watch on YouTube if you feel like giving it a watch. The Strange Thing About the Johnsons is a deeply disturbing story of a father and son and their non-consensual relationship. However, despite your likely presumptions when you first hear this premise, the abuser is actually the son of the family, and the father is his unfortunate victim. Not that this makes the premise any less incredibly disturbing, but it is a notably different spin on the usual dynamic of this sort of thing. I will be avoiding using the family's names for this section, because the son's name is Isaiah, and that's my name. Speaking of the subject matter of this film using my name, frankly, I suppose it makes for a more interesting viewing experience, but it does not work well when I'm trying to discuss it in this format. The film opens with a father and son having a deeply awkward, pretty weird, but strangely wholesome conversation about self-care after the father walks in on the son in said act. However, after the father leaves the room, the camera pans to a photo in the son's hand, and the photo is one of his father. The film jumps ahead 14 years to the son's wedding, where the mother notices the two haven't been seen in a while and sets out to find them. And find them she does, unbeknownst to either of the men. I must reiterate that this relationship, if it can be called that, and not multiple instances of incredible violence, is completely one-sided and non-consensual. The father, a famous writer, finishes his final work, which he intends to act as both an autobiography and confession, and attempts to exit his home, presumably to commit suicide, but is blocked from doing so after an unexpected visit from his son, who of course discovers this confession. After brutally being assaulted once more while in the bath as a punishment for writing this confession, the father has enough and attempts to leave with the book the following morning. He's chased into the street by his son and tragically hit by a van and killed instantly. After the funeral, the mother and son have a tense confrontation where she finally demands answers from her son, answers he refuses to give, resulting in a violent and sudden physical altercation that eventually ends with her stabbing him with a fire poker 16 times, I counted, while she wails, having lost both the man she loved and her son, who had in her eyes likely become a source of unimaginable misery. The strange thing about the Johnsons is quintessential Ari Aster. He loves juxtaposing intense horror with lively scenes lit brightly by daylight, and these are plentiful here. You might think this would make the viewer feel safer, that the daylight and the well-lit environments would reduce the tension of some of the more unsettling imagery, but if anything, it's the opposite. We're often conditioned to view daylight scenes as safe when watching horror movies, to see them as a moment of respite in between haunting nighttime scenes where more carnage and evil lingers in the shadows. But once the evil creeps into the daylight, that security blanket is gone. We know that the danger can come at any moment, and the adrenaline spike of needing to stay on guard is palpable. Aster clearly draws influence from drama and horror of all kinds, but I think that the influence of films like Roman Polanski's 1969 film Rosemary's Baby and by Michael Haneke's 2001 film The Piano Teacher are most prevalent here. Aster has a masterful ability to spend the majority of his runtime in all of his films building suspense with these small, tense moments that make your mind feel like a Jenga tower, with each moment representing a block being carefully and deliberately pulled from the tower, and when it finally falls, it comes crashing down into a beautiful crescendo of sudden and shocking violence, dread, and horror. And the strange thing about the Johnsons, this method hasn't reached its full potential, but that can't be said for what would come 7 years later with Ari Aster's first theatrical release. I've already talked about Hereditary quite a bit on this channel, and even already in this video, but something about this movie fundamentally changed the way that I saw horror, even as somebody who has been a lifelong fan of the genre. And it's one of the reasons why it's among my favorite films of all time. The tragedy of Hereditary, especially upon multiple viewings, is knowing that from the beginning of the film, and even before that, the Grahams are hapless pawns in the cult of Pyman's scheme. Each thing that happens is all part of the plan, and every cultist present at the end of the film can be noticed in all of the preceding scenes, from the man behind Charlie at Ellen's funeral who gives her a haunting smile, to Peter's teacher, to the girl at the party chopping nuts for the cake, the same cake that causes Charlie to have an allergic reaction, which means she needs to find Peter while he's smoking weed with his friends, at least one of which can also be seen at the end of the movie, which means he has to drive her to the hospital, the only route to which is on the very road the cult has already dragged a dead deer onto and marked a certain telephone pole with the symbol of Pyman, which happens to be the pole that Charlie will inevitably slam into so hard that she'll be up for a part in an off-Broadway rendition of Six.
Don't worry, don't lose your head. I didn't mean to hurt anyone.
I know that the death of a child may seem inappropriate to joke about, but these films are emotionally exhausting and I need to get my kicks. Plus, it isn't like anyone actually died. Millie Shapiro is right there, she's fine. Anyway, these events were set into motion by none other than Annie's mother, Ellen, a member of a cult that worships the demon Pyman, who is said to be one of the 8 kings of hell. According to spiritual texts, Pyman is said to know the secrets of science, wealth, and even creating servant spirits. Logic dictates that this cult wanted to bring Pyman into the physical world in order to utilize this power for themselves, and for one reason or another, he has tied himself to Ellen's bloodline. In a group therapy session that Annie attends after Charlie's death, Annie mentions that the men in her family suffered extensively from mental health issues, namely her father and her brother. Annie even talks about how during a particularly brutal schizophrenic episode, her brother accused her mother of trying to put people in him. We later learn that Pyman deeply prefers male hosts, and it all begins to click together. Annie's mother was trying to put something in her brother, and it was only by ending his own life that he was able to escape the hold that she had on him. Annie mentions that she and Ellen were estranged during her pregnancy with Peter and through his early childhood, but after learning of her mother's declining health during her pregnancy with Charlie, Annie decided to reconnect, and it was through this reconnection that Ellen dug her way back in. While Pyman preferred a male host, any host at all would adequately suffice, at least for a short time, and Annie provided Ellen with the perfect opportunity to give her demonic master a host before she died. It's unknown precisely how Pyman came to possess Charlie, but Annie says that from the moment she was born, Ellen had buried her hooks in Charlie. There are small pieces of evidence provided to us throughout the film that the version of Charlie we see the entire time she's on screen isn't actually her, but Pyman uncomfortably trying to adjust to a less than ideal host. Charlie acts strangely, wandering listlessly about the house and the property, even going as far as to wander outside at night and sleep in the treehouse, where the nipping cold mountain air could easily cause frostbite. She casually eats nuts even though she's deathly allergic, and in general seems to have a disregard for both her own life and the life of other living beings. You could chalk all of these things up to kids doing stupid things, but personally I believe that these are signs that Pyman is trying to escape Charlie's body so that his followers will find him a more suitable vessel. After Charlie's cruel and gut-wrenching death, the Graham family, a family that was already beginning to falter due to Annie's unstable mental health and Stephen's general apathy, descends into a free fall of bitterness and contempt. This environment seems to be ripe for Pyman to take hold of his next most suitable host among the family, Peter. It isn't until toward the end of the film, after Annie has been tricked by one of the cultists into performing a seance in her own home, that all the pieces fall into play. And this film that has so far been a slow burn of one tragic event after another crescendos into madness and true horror that no matter how hard you try, you can't look away from. As Stephen desperately tries to calm Annie from her hysterics, and she in turn is just as desperately trying to get Stephen to see that all she wants is to save them from what's to come, Annie urges Stephen to throw Pyman's book into the fire, insisting that everything will make sense then. This, of course, is a trick of the demon, and it's Stephen, not the book, who is immediately set ablaze. Annie stands there with her mouth agape in horror, and finally her mind has been fractured enough to become a temporary vessel for the demon. What follows is the most cerebral ending to a horror film I've ever experienced, hitting exponentially harder because of the amount of emotional buildup that has transpired before this moment, and it culminates in Peter standing in the treehouse in the backyard, mentally and emotionally shattered, and perfectly primed to be the final vessel for Pyman. As I mentioned before, Hereditary's entire inciting event is set into motion by Annie's mother Ellen, and I find it interesting that Ari Aster subverts the notion of a mother's role in the family paradigm as a protector and nurturer of children, not just with Ellen literally trying to make her son and later her granddaughter into vessels for a demon, but also in the form of Annie. During her group therapy session, Annie mentions having had an episode earlier on in Peter's life where she, in an apparent fugue state, doused him with gasoline as he slept and was about to set him on fire. She snapped out of it as she was holding the lit match, seeing Peter crying for her as she, just moments earlier, was ready to torch him like a marshmallow over a campfire. Annie's mental health is clearly the result of her own traumatic upbringing. While the cult activity was unknown to her and to a lesser extent her brother, she says that her mother would frequently pit her and her brother against each other, giving love conditionally based on who had been sucking up to her more, whichever one of them was more desperate for approval and would allow themselves to be manipulated. And this sort of desperation for a mother's approval and love is present in another one of Ari Aster's films, one that appears to be one of his most divisive. I know that this might make it seem like I'm going to be skipping over Midsommar. Don't worry, I'm not. I wanted to talk about Beau is Afraid first, because I feel like it doesn't get the same level of appreciation as Midsommar and Hereditary. And while I can understand why, Aster's films aren't everyone's cup of tea to begin with, and Beau is Afraid fits into an even narrower niche, I still feel like it's a great film, albeit a bit disjointed. Beau, the main character of the film, is a neurotic, anxious, and paranoid man who lives in an unnamed, crime-ridden city. Seriously, this place looks like what your conservative family imagines every city to be like. The bodies of murder victims are left to rot on the street, tweakers and the mentally ill are everywhere, and firearms are openly being sold on folding tables on the sidewalk. Hey, maybe the city's not all bad. Am I right, Uncle Chat? Now, when I first watched this movie, my working theory was that maybe everything we were seeing here was an exaggerated version of reality to show us just how bad Beau's anxiety and mental health were. That explanation didn't last long, and it especially didn't survive to the end of the film. Beau is led to believe by everyone in his life, from his psychiatrist to his overbearing mother to strangers he meets in the world, that he is the one with the problem, despite having an objectively correct feeling of constant dread and fear that any rational person living in a world like this would feel. Every scene in the first half of the movie is suffocating. There's one in particular towards the beginning of the film that always gets to me. Beau's been prescribed a new medication, zipnotracil, by his psychiatrist, who tells him that he must always take it with water. When the time comes for him to take his medication, he finds that the water in his apartment building has been shut off after he's already taken the pill. In a panic, he turns to the internet to see what side effects await him, only to immediately find a news story about a man who died after doing the same thing. Beau frantically runs across the street to a convenience store to get a bottle of water, which he drinks half of before going up to the cashier to pay. He then finds that his card gets declined, and while he frantically looks through his wallet trying to find the correct change, he looks out to the street and sees that his apartment building, the door to which he's propped open because his keys had been stolen earlier that day, is being flooded with violent lunatics from the street, who then spend the entire night trashing his apartment while he sleeps on scaffolding outside his window. The entire film is like this, where one small mistake cascades into a horrible and nerve-wracking ordeal that is enough to overstimulate even the most neurotypical of viewers. At one point in the film, after wandering through the woods, Beau stumbles upon a troupe of actors calling themselves the Orphans of the Forest, and he finds himself enamored with their play, imagining himself as the protagonist in a beautiful 10-minute scene which was directed and animated by Cristobal Leon and Joaquin Cosina, the writers and directors of the incredibly beautiful and masterfully and painstakingly animated film La Casa Lobo. I did a video on that as a kind of companion piece to this video if you want to check that out too. Beau uses this play as a means of imagining what his life could be like if he hadn't spent his entire existence under the thumb of his mother. And it's a gorgeous scene where he settles down in a village, learns a trade, and starts a family with a woman, raising 3 boys. He's then separated from them and spends the rest of his life searching for them. As his body deteriorates and crumples from decades of wandering, he gives up, unable to search anymore. It's heartbreaking, and the scenery and set design is breathtaking. Over 2 hours into this 3-hour movie, Beau eventually arrives at his mother's house for her funeral, but has just missed the service. The only other person who shows up after him is a woman named Elaine, who Beau had met when they were both children. They had a short-lived relationship that was unable to be fully realized due to the domineering nature of Beau's mother. But as the two reconnect, they realize that there is still romantic potential there. They have sex, but the entire time, Beau is terrified that he will die if something he was told happened to his father. Beau is fine, but it's Elaine who dies mid. As Beau panics, trying to collect himself, his mother emerges from the shadows. She faked her death to test his love for her. And not only that, she reveals that she had arranged for his therapy sessions to be recorded. She plays back the recordings and berates Beau for not caring about her enough, accuses him of secretly hating her, and Beau is over it. He demands to know what actually happened to his father, and in true Ari Aster fashion, the last 20 minutes of the movie descend into pure and unbridled insanity. I obviously can't show you footage of it, but Beau's mother leads him into the attic of her house, only to reveal that his father is a giant penis monster. Beau's mother continues to berate him for a perceived lack of affection, and he tries to strangle her before realizing what he's doing and escapes from her estate, stealing a small motorboat. He sails into the dark abyss of the water and the night sky before finding himself inside of a crowded arena, surrounded by literally everyone he's ever met. He finds himself on trial for, again, perceived slights against his mother. As he desperately tries to plead his case, he realizes the futility of his situation and accepts his fate. The engine of the boat explodes, and then the boat capsizes. You can hear Beau's mother's sob as people shuffle out of the arena, and the film ends. I actually didn't realize this until I was rewatching this movie, but in the first few minutes, there's a short scene with a boy and his mother as Beau is walking home that directly references this. This movie is a roller coaster of anxiety, but the way that it ties into the thesis of this video is the obvious fact that everything that happens in the movie, and by extension, everything that's ever happened in Beau's life, has been the direct result of manipulation from his mother, Mona. Mona is a highly ranking employee of an international pharmaceutical company, which explains why she she has so much power to manipulate the world around her. It's even implied that she owns Beau's apartment building. And as I said before, Beau is led throughout the entire film by everyone around him that he is the problem in almost every misunderstanding or antic that occurs, when his general anxiety and panic is the direct result of the absolutely terrifying world he finds himself surrounded by. In my opinion, this movie certainly has the least amount of rewatchability when compared to Aster's other films, and I think that this is the only one in this video that I wouldn't choose to watch of my own free will unless I really wanted to show it to someone. It isn't that it's bad, far from it. It's that it's so perfectly able to distill the emotion of anxiety and the way that we all feel when we find ourselves falling down rabbit holes of catastrophization that, like I said earlier, can make it feel like an almost suffocating experience that makes me want to set myself on fire. And speaking of that, let's get going on. As much as I talk about how much I love Hereditary, Midsommar is my second favorite Ari Aster film by a very close margin, and it still holds a very special place in my heart. The fact that the entire film takes place during the period of midnight sun, a phenomenon that occurs in northern Sweden during the summer in which the sun either doesn't set at all or may only set for about 3 or 4 hours, means that there are almost no scenes that take place in darkness once our main characters arrive in Sweden. The main character of the film is Danny, played by Florence Pugh. The opening scenes of the movie show that Danny is growing increasingly concerned about her bipolar sister, and that Danny has been unable to reach her or their parents since she sent Danny an ominous email. She calls her boyfriend Christian, who doesn't seem to like her very much, and is implied to have been growing increasingly distant. This is later outright stated. After Christian dismisses her feelings when Danny calls him about the situation, Danny receives a phone call that will shatter her world. Her sister has committed a horrifying murder-suicide with their parents, poisoning their entire house with carbon monoxide, and Danny being unaffected since she is away at college. Christian, who was about to break up with Danny, now feels trapped in a relationship that he is no longer emotionally invested in. This likely comes from a feeling that he's sparing her from emotional turmoil without taking into consideration that his actions are only making her feel more alone, hurt, and broken. Christian continues to string Danny along for months on end. During a conversation with Christian's friend Pelle, an exchange student from Sweden, Danny discovers that Christian and his friends are planning on going to Sweden the following month to visit his village for the Midsommar Festival, which is only held once every 90 years. This is something that Christian had neglected entirely to share with her. After Danny confronts Christian, he invites her to go, not expecting her to want to go, since the trip is such a short notice. Except Danny does go, and the group set out to Pelle's village. The rest of the film is a masterclass in how cults manage to trap their victims, especially those like Danny who are emotionally vulnerable and have distant or even no family to speak of. They will often shock you with things that you would normally find terrifying or unacceptable, like the Ettestup, a ritual that the Harga conduct in which the elderly are to cast themselves from a cliff so as to not become burdensome to the community in their old age. This is said by some to be a prehistoric paganistic ritual that took place in ancient Norse cultures, but the actual evidence that this really occurred is apparently spotty at best, and is likely just a legend. Cults will also often indoctrinate you into isolating yourself from the people you know, love, and care about. The Harga do their best to separate the group once they arrive, and one by one, they're slowly picked off. Pelle, who is clearly enamored with Danny, whether or not this is a feeling of genuine love or of infatuation, who's to say? But what we do know is that he does well to drive a wedge between her and Christian. And to be fair, Christian is a shitty guy and an even shittier boyfriend, so it isn't so much wedging them apart as much as it is pulling off a loosely attached band-aid. The group is also constantly being drugged with psychedelic mushroom tea, which only adds to the disorientation and confusion of the events of the film. Christian ultimately gets what's coming to him after he's caught having sex with Pelle's sister in one of the most insane rituals I've ever seen in a movie. And of course I'm not going to show you that. What, you think I'm trying to get wiped off the platform? Get out of here. The truly nefarious nature of cults is to make lost people feel like they've been found, like they're being made whole by whatever sense of community they're offering this individual, like they're being given a second chance at having a real family. And that's what makes Danny such a perfect candidate for being the Harga's May Queen. Her sister took everything that she knew from her, completely pulled the earth from beneath her, leaving her with nothing. Pele and later the Harga see this and recognize this from the moment they lay eyes on her and set their plan into motion. Just like the Graham family, just like Beau, Dani never had a chance because her greatest loss was already being set into motion by none other than her most trusted family member. And I think that this is where the true horror comes from in Ari Aster's work. The fact that our families, the people in our lives who are supposed to be among our greatest sources of emotional security, of nurturing, of love, can see us simply as a means to an end, as pieces to a puzzle where we don't have the full picture. Horror, of course, comes from the subversion of our own internal expectations. But these films, especially upon multiple watches, feel more like tragedies, like train wrecks or highway pileups from which we're unable to look away. They make us feel like we should raise our walls because if we let our guard down, what are the chances that we'll be next on the chopping block? That's a logical fallacy, of course, and I'm definitely not advocating for anyone to cut their families off just because an Ari Aster film made them feel a little uneasy. It's just one of the many things that can keep us thinking about a horror film long after we walk out of the theater. If you're still watching, thank you. Seriously. This video took a lot of work, and it's been a long time coming. If you liked it, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving the video a like, commenting. Any of that interaction just really helps me out a lot, and it helps me grow on the platform. YouTube also thinks that you'll like this video, so if you have a chance, maybe go ahead and check that one out too. And most importantly, my name is Isaiah, and thank you for watching my video.